Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you guys with the most up-to-date political, economic and geostrategic analysis on the world's #2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Okay, happy Wednesday everybody. Before we move into the main developments, at least 5 people have died and another 8 are missing after an explosion at a chemical plant in northeast China's Liaoning province, according to the national government. A previous statement from the local government stated that 30 people had been injured. The blast happened on Sunday afternoon during maintenance work. It's being reported locally that after several days of unsuccessfully trying to repair an alkylation reaction material pipeline leak, the pipeline burst, with the ejected material igniting and causing a large explosion. Okay, now for the main stories. The PRC has reached a pivotal and likely historic moment. After years of a declining birth rate, China's population is now officially shrinking. We have discussed in previous videos that some experts argue that official numbers have been underemphasizing the severity of the birth rate decline for well over a decade, and that China has been shrinking for some time already. For example, Fu Xianyi, a demographer at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, estimates that China's population started to fall back in 2018. Though this is debated by demographers outside of China. On Tuesday, the National Bureau of Statistics said that 9.56 million people were born in China in 2022, down from 10.6 million in 2021, while 10.41 million people died. This is the first time that deaths have outnumbered births, officially, since the Great Leap Forward and resulting massive famine during the Mao era of the early 1960s. Quote, "The drop is not a surprise, though it came earlier than most people assumed it would, even a few years ago. To date, none of the policies to spur more births have gotten traction, and it is unlikely they will, even if the government rolls out a lot more incentives. India, now, is likely the world's most populous nation." End quote. Indeed, India's population is poised to outgrow China's later this year, according to a recent estimate from the United Nations. China's birth rate in 2022 was the lowest on record, and this will likely continue to decline. In a recent survey of more than 20,000 people in China, aged between 18 and 31, and mostly women, conducted by the Asia Society, 2/3 of respondents said they did not desire to have children. Other surveys have demonstrated similar sentiment. Recently, one survey, however, showed that 80% of Chinese students want to have 2 children. This survey went viral on Chinese social media. But even the state-run Global Times admitted in an article this week, quote, "The real survey results show that 80% of Chinese students believe having 2 children is ideal, but this does not mean they will actually do so." End quote. Meanwhile, the slow-moving aging population phenomenon, observed in many developed economies for years now already, marches on. Last year, 209.78 million people were aged 65 and over, 14.85% of the population, up from 200 million, 14.16% of the population, in 2021. According to the United Nations, by 2035, 400 million people in China are expected to be over 60, accounting for nearly 1/3 of the population. China's working-age population, those between 16 and 59 years of age, shrank from 62.5% of the total population at the end of 2021 to 62% of the population at the end of 2022. The UN now forecasts that China's population will shrink by 109 million by 2050, more than triple the decline they forecast only 4 years ago in 2019. The obvious concern is that labor shortages will reduce tax revenue and contributions to a pension system already suboptimal and under tremendous pressure. Outlying reports from just a few years ago arguing that China's population could drop by 1/2 by 2080 are now increasingly becoming more in line with the consensus, and are even appearing optimistic. Indeed, as we observed last week, even China's own Yuhua Population Research Institute predicts that China's population could shrink by over 60% by the end of the century. So with the release of this official data, what are analysts saying? Quote, "In the long run, we are going to see a China the world has never seen. It will no longer be the young, vibrant, growing population. We will start to appreciate China, in terms of its population, as an old and shrinking population." End quote. And quote, "China is facing a demographic crisis that far exceeds the imagination of Chinese authorities and the international community." End quote. And quote, "China cannot rely on the demographic dividend as a structural driver for economic growth. Economic growth will have to depend more on productivity growth, which is driven by government policies." End quote. State media, on the other hand, is being more optimistic. Quote, "Most experts interviewed by the paper said a declining population is not necessarily linked to a drop in economic growth, with some citing low birth rates in developed nations with strong economies." End quote. Hey guys, if you're enjoying this episode of China Update, don't forget to hit that like button. If you have not subscribed and you do get some value from these episodes, maybe consider subscribing. And as always, anyone who can go that extra mile and help me keep China Update sustainable, be part of the community that keeps China Update going, Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description below. Thank you so much, everybody, for the ongoing support. Next up, we have the Chinese economy, and we are going to look specifically at the official Q4 and 2022 economic numbers, as well as some thoughts from analysts and experts on the implications of this data. In 2022, GDP growth officially hit 3%, below the government target of 5.5%, and breaking sharply from the 8.4% growth in 2021. 3% is approximately what analysts were expecting. If we exclude the 2.2% growth we saw in 2020, the year of the first Wuhan and national lockdowns, 2022's growth was the slowest China has seen since 1976. In Q4, according to the National Bureau of Statistics numbers released yesterday, Tuesday, GDP grew 2.9% year-on-year, slower than the third quarter's 3.9%. Now, some may be asking, with such a tough 2022, how did the economy grow at all? Well, as we've done in the past, we need to look closely at the details of the growth. According to the National Bureau of Statistics report in 2022, total retail sales of consumer goods was down by 0.2% year-on-year. Retail sales in urban areas was down 0.3% year-on-year. In 2022, national online retail sales, normally a strong growth area, increased only 4%. Retail sales is a good proxy for consumption, and we can see here that it was very weak in 2022. We know last year the government turned to infrastructure investment to stimulate the economy and keep it at politically acceptable levels. We can see this in the data as well. In 2022, investment in fixed assets was up 5.1% over the previous year. Specifically, writes the National Bureau of Statistics, the investment in infrastructure went up 9.4%. It is here that we can see what kept GDP in growth territory in the year 2022, and it demonstrates that the growth was not particularly healthy. Quote, "I have long argued what really matters for China is not reported GDP growth, which isn't sustainable, but rather high-quality growth, which was probably close to zero last year. Today's data release means that at the end of 2022, total social financing, our best proxy for debt, was equal to 286% of GDP, up a very worrying 11.5 percentage points. This means that the total increase in total social financing in 2022 was equal to just under 27% of the year's GDP. This also means that it took a 4.6 RMB increase in debt to generate each 1 RMB increase in nominal GDP. This compares to a 2 RMB increase in debt in 2021, 12 RMB in 2020, 3.4 RMB in 2019, and 2.2 RMB in 2018. I expect that this year it will be 2.9 to 3.4 RMB. There is a real question about how much longer Beijing can rely on such large increases in debt to generate acceptable GDP growth. As we have seen with the property sector, however, it is pretty clear that the longer it takes, the more painful the adjustment is likely to be." End quote. Okay, now returning to the official numbers published yesterday, the data show also, unsurprisingly, that real estate development was down by 10%. This is the first time that China's property investment has fallen in a calendar year since 1999. Floor space of commercial buildings sold was down a painful 24.3%. The total sales of commercial buildings plunged almost 27%, according to the official numbers. With the speed at which Beijing has abandoned its highly disruptive zero-COVID and moves through its first wave, combined with a likely boost in pent-up demand, which we've discussed in previous videos, analysts are increasingly optimistic on Chinese growth in 2023. Quote, "The outlook in GDP growth in 2023 has improved compared to our prior outlook. That is not to ignore the fact that China still faces considerable headwinds, including external demand, with recessions likely in the US and Europe this year." End quote. However, most analysts also agree that this good 2023 economic year will be short-lived, and after that boost of pent-up demand has passed, the same need to transition the growth model and the long and medium-term systemic and structural reforms needed will once again be facing Beijing's economic policy makers. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. Have a great day wherever you are, and I will see you all tomorrow.